Knatz Peck and Dr. Jesse Manzel from the UCSD Eating Disorders Center for Treatment and Research. We at NEDA are really pleased to offer this great resource today and to hear from Dr. Peck and Dr. Manzel about the important resources that they're offering for caregivers, which is a really important topic right now, especially at this time. So I'm going to hand it over to them to share some of their resources. But first, I want to give a brief introduction so you can learn a little bit about their work and what they do. Dr. Stephanie Knatz Peck is a clinical psychologist and also the program director for intensive family treatment programs at UCSD for their Eating Disorders Treatment and Research Center. In addition to directing the adult and adolescent IFT programs, Dr. Peck is also involved in the translational clinical treatment research focused on translating neurobiological research into applied clinical treatments for eating disorders. And this is something that is really a priority for and important for our field and for NEDA as well. Being able to utilize the research that's happening in the field for treatment. Dr. Peck co-leads the development, testing, and oversight of novel clinical treatments for both adolescents and adults with eating disorders, including temperament-based treatment with supports, a model that advocates for the inclusion of parents and support givers in treatment, which is what we're going to be talking about today, how to really engage family members and caregivers in the treatment process. Also want to welcome Dr. Jesse Manzel. She is an assistant clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry at UCSD and the founder of the pediatric program at UCSD Center for Treatment and Research. She earned her PhD in clinical psychology from the University of South Florida and completed her internship at UCSD and the San Diego VA healthcare system. She has extensive treatment experience working with children, adolescents, and adults with eating disorders at all levels of care. She has specialized training experience in family-based therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, motivational interviewing, and the exposure and response prevention for OCD and other anxiety disorders. So I'm really pleased to have you both here today, and I'm going to pass it over to you to talk a bit more about how we engage caregivers in treatment and how important that is, particularly at this moment in time.
Thank you. Great, thanks, Claire. We decided to do something today that we wanted to introduce you all to a really specific skill set that you all could take home with you today and use right now in supporting your loved ones who you are probably spending a lot more time with now at home than you usually are. At UCSD, it's really important to us to engage parents and caregivers in treatment. We invite them in to join treatment groups and to join skills groups. We really like to make sure we're imparting our caregivers with lots of specific tools to support their loved ones. And so we thought we would give a sampling of a tool that we teach often and that we think is incredibly valuable today, and that is the communication skill of validation. There are a lot of different ways to support your loved one. There are skills or supports that are going to work for one person, but not necessarily work for another. But a key to utilizing these skills is really being able to communicate with your loved one and be able to meet them where they're at so that you guys can engage in effective communication, which I think is ultimately what's going to lead to the most success in supporting your loved one with an eating disorder at home. So just really briefly, validation as a communication skill is simply just a way of communicating to another person that his or her thoughts or feelings make sense, that their actions make sense given a situation, that you are trying to understand or understand their feelings, and that the way they're feeling makes sense given a particular situation. So there are lots of different ways you can do it. We like to say there's 6 or 7 different levels of validation, and we're going to kind of go through some quick examples and then do a couple of role plays for you all just to illustrate some of these things in action. So I'll start going through the list, but Steph, feel free to jump in whenever you have some ideas or examples. So the first way simply to validate is when you're sitting with your loved one or meeting them in a difficult situation. The first thing to just keep in mind is simply to listen and stay focused. Make eye contact, watch your body language. So be on the lookout for those eye rolls, try to check those at the door, open arms, no crossing elbows as you try to like figure out what the other person's going through.
And this can be even harder right now because all of us are juggling multiple roles as supports and sometimes parents at home, whereas maybe before we would go to work and then come home and have our full attention on, you know, the people that we live with. Nowadays, we're cooking and homeschooling and doing all this, so it's easy to get stuck in doing multiple things at the same time. And so what we're talking about here is being fully engaged and present by dropping everything else that you're doing to listen.
Yes. So that's probably, first of all, one of the most important things you can do is when your loved one is struggling or trying to tell you something, simply putting other things aside, getting close to them, getting on their eye level, and just giving them your full attention can really go a long way to helping someone feel heard.
And we know that, you know, most of us don't have time to drop everything that we're doing all day long, but it's amazing the power of doing that for even 5 minutes, like really putting aside 5 minutes of time to say, I'm going to drop everything else I'm doing and really just listen and engage. And as Jesse's saying, validation is so much, is a little bit about how you communicate that you understand, but it's so much about your nonverbal presence. So if you are showing up and listening, you are likely going to be validating just by doing that.
So the second way to validate, to take things a step further, is to simply start with describing and reflecting what the other person is telling you. So I think that validation can be tricky because sometimes validation is confused with agreement, or like you're able to somehow demonstrate being able to perfectly put yourself into somebody else's shoes. But I think it's simply, first of all, just acknowledging or showing the other person that you've heard what it is that they're saying. So even if it doesn't all make sense to you right away, even if you're not quite sure that you get where they're coming from, just start with describing back to them what you're noticing. You can describe their emotions, their body language. You know, you seem like you're really upset right now, or it feels to me like you're nervous about something, or you're really anxious, or what I'm hearing you tell me is that you are really frustrated with me right now. It might seem trivial, but it's also just a great point to just check for understanding. You know, I think one of the most invalidating experiences is when somebody else sort of makes that leap that they just assume that they know what you're talking about. So I think it's really great to start at that basic level just to kind of check. And maybe you missed the mark, but at least you'll get that opportunity for the other person to say like, oh, no, that's not quite it. And so then you can kind of keep going and try to figure out what's happening.
And as Jessie mentioned, we're not just parroting back or using reflective statements about the content of what we're hearing, but a really important aspect of validation is trying to pick up on emotional cues and the emotional tone of what someone's saying or feeling as they're talking as well, which is really important.
Yeah. So then to take things even farther, the next thing you can do is try to voice understanding. And again, understanding does not have to mean agreement. There are lots of ways to demonstrate understanding of what someone with an eating disorder is going through without approving of the actions that they're taking or the eating disorder logic that might be happening or going on. So for example, it makes sense to me why you're having such a hard time with this meal right now, given the fact that we're trying to help you eat more than you're comfortable eating. It makes sense to me that you're not feeling very good about the way that you look right now because your body is changing and we're trying to work through helping you through recovery. You know, sort of trying to place into context why it is that they're struggling and recognizing that that makes sense, even if the way that they're choosing to deal with it is maybe not the most helpful course of action. Okay. And then finally, the probably most validating way, the most effective way to validate, or kind of the highest level of validation, is to show the other person just that you take them seriously, either through your actions or your words, which simply means that you are taking steps to meet the other person's needs. A really great example of this is just very basic. If somebody says that they're thirsty, the best way to validate them is to bring them a glass of water, right?
Not by saying, I hear that you're thirsty, is that right? That would not be an appropriate thing to do in that moment.
So if somebody is anxious or they're struggling at a meal, it's okay. What do you need for me to help you right now? How can I help you? And then when they express that, trying to give them that. So, helping them with a skill, giving them a suggestion, working to problem solve with them at that moment. If they're sad and if they're crying, giving a hug, giving a comforting gesture. Those are some of the most validating things that you could do in that moment. So showing that person that you take them seriously through your actions. Absolutely. Okay. So I think without further ado, we'll jump into a couple examples here. Unless you want to go through first maybe how not to validate, or maybe some common pitfalls to avoid.
What we'll do is we're going to do a few role plays, and we'll start by some examples of what's not validating, and then go and kind of correct ourselves by showing some examples of how to be validating. And I think some important things to keep in mind, everyone, is that there are so many ways to validate. And I think sometimes when we get mechanical about practicing this, we get stuck on a certain way, like using reflective statements, and it can come across as really robotic. You'll hear teenagers say things like, stop trying to be a therapist, or you always say that you hear what I'm saying, but you don't. And so I think if you are showing up and listening and genuinely trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, which is empathy, then your natural, genuine way of validation will come out. So that is the most important thing. We will show some examples, but this is not the only way that you can respond by validation.
Okay, all right, so we're gonna go to our first one here.
What's wrong?
I'm just so full. I can't eat another bite. Please
well, you know that's part of the meal plan, so you're gonna have to do that.
But my stomach hurts so much. I had so much food today.
This is exactly the amount you ate yesterday.
But it hurts. Like I can't put any more in my stomach.
I know, this is what you need. Okay. That is maybe okay to say, but that if we're practicing full validation, that is not starting with validation. So Jesse, how did that make you feel when I was just reminding you of what you had to do?
It made me feel like you weren't hearing me. Like you weren't listening to what I had to say. Like I know it's my meal plan, but that doesn't mean that it's easy for me to do this. So it really felt like you were dismissive and kind of like robotic in how you were responding to me.
And I noticed that you were getting increasingly emotional, because sometimes when we don't validate, what ends up happening is people get more stuck in trying to make their point, and we end up raising their emotions more. So let's try that again. And one thing to know about validation, just to repeat, yes, many times in recovery, people do need to complete their full meals, and there are rules that they need to follow that are really tough. But validation doesn't necessarily mean agreement, right? So in this example, you're going to notice that we're going to try to validate while still staying the course, or not changing the guidelines, or, what needs to be done. All right. You okay?
My stomach really hurts right now. I'm getting really full. I don't know if I can finish.
That's hard.
Yeah, I've had so much today, and a lot of food on my plate, and I just don't know if I can fit any more in.
Yeah, it is a lot. Is there anything that I might be able to do to help you get through this?
I don't know. I'm just feeling really uncomfortable.
What are you feeling exactly?
Like really bloated and just like kind of nauseous or upset stomach.
Yeah, it's really hard to eat when you're nauseous too. I can understand why that would be hard.
Do I have to finish all of it?
You do have to finish it. I'm wondering if you can think of anything that might help you. Like we could play a game, or I could get you your heating pack.
Oh, the heating pack would be really nice. Could I have the heating pack?
Yeah.
And I think playing a game would be a good idea too.
Okay. So that was an example of validating and still holding firm on requirements, which can be really, really hard to do, because again, the easiest way to validate is sometimes by just granting a request, but sometimes we can't do that, especially with eating disorders. So notice that a lot of what was being done there was just kind of listening, right? And trying to use, I don't know if this is translating over video, but you want to be also doing emotional matching with facial expressions, and really just, sometimes it's not words that you need to say, just listening and engaging.
And I'll have to say, being on the receiving of that, it's really hard to like continue to get mad at you when you're doing such a great job of being empathic. So there were times where I felt like I wanted more from you, but it wasn't like in I'm mad at you sort of way, just sort of like you're not ultimately kind of giving me that out that I want, but it didn't raise my emotional intensity when she was being so reflective and empathic.
That's a really good point. When we don't kind of present a rebuttal, we don't give someone something to argue back with, which is a nice reminder.
Yeah. So. Before we go into the next one, something else again that I just want to emphasize is like the fact that, you know, we're not giving you guys a ton of different tools or a ton of different skill sets here right now, because I think that there are just so many things that can work, and there's so many different ways to support a loved one. But I think you're not going to do a great job supporting someone if you can't even get the communication going to begin with, which is, again, why we think this skill is so great. Okay, so here we're running down in time. We've got 1 minute left.
And feel free to add any comments into the chat box that you want us to respond to. We'll probably get through one more example, and sounds like maybe leave a little bit of time.
Should we do our COVID example that I'm so sick and tired?
Let's do it. I think it's relevant.
Oh, I'm so sick and tired of being at home all day.
We've all been stuck at home, so.
I just want to go see my friends.
You can't do that right now, I know.
But why not?
Well,
it's just one person.
It's going to be like 2 more weeks. And, you know, after 2 more weeks, probably you'll be able to do it. And, I mean, we're all in the same boat.
2 weeks is forever. And like, you get to be on the Zoom calls with your friends at work all day long.
You can Zoom if you want to. Yeah, well, we're just going to have to deal with it. This is the circumstances that we've been dealt.
Ugh,
all right.
Frustrating.
Okay, so let's do our revised, improved example of validation. And again, I just want to add that sometimes when we're having people practice validation, it doesn't mean you only have to validate, although that's what we're doing in this example. But often what we'll have supports practice is just starting by responding with a statement of validation. So even if you have other things to say, you can always start by a comment of validation. All right.
Oh, I'm so sick and tired of being stuck at home all day long. I just want to go see my friends.
I know, you must miss them so much.
I do. It's been like 2 months since I've been able to hang out with them.
That's such a long time. What are you most looking forward to doing with them?
Like, I just want to go to the beach, like, hang out, like, you know, listen to music. I mean, it's just not, like, it's just not the same when I have to only hang out with them over Zoom.
Yeah, it's such a bummer, and Zoom is definitely not the same.
No, it's not at all. It is so awkward and weird, and, like, I don't know, I just can't have good conversations that way.
Yeah, it's really hard to connect with people, too. I'm really excited about the prospect of doing that in the future.
Me too. Just afraid people are going to like forget about me, or I won't have the same friendships when this is all over, or that it's going to be weird and awkward to go back to school with everybody.
Do you think other people feel like that too?
Oh, I know that they do, because I mean, that's all we like talk about is how much we miss each other.
Yeah, I really miss my friends too, so I get where you're coming from. Okay. All right, so that was an improved example. And again, I hope that what we're highlighting is that, you know, validation is helpful for the person on the receiving end, but it actually is also helpful for the person, if you're trying to get through, you're going to be more effective and be able to engage and get through to your loved one better if you're able to, if they feel like you're understanding where they're coming from.
Yeah, so press pause, don't jump in to immediately solve the problem first, just try to understand the person where they're at. And then a whole host of other options are going to open up to you once you can have the person kind of on board with you, communicating well, and you've decreased the emotional intensity in the room.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in today, and feel free to send any questions our way about this. We wish we had more time to go over other skills with you, too, because there's lots there.
Thank you so much.